All right, good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, June 15th, 2016, and this is Before the First Cup of Jules here on UCY.TV. Happy Wednesday, everyone. It is a sunny, I'll let you know in a second. It's loading. Feels like it's probably about 72 or so degrees here in upstate New York. 71, I was right on the money. And it is supposed to be beautiful next 5 to 7 days here. So I think spring and early summer has finally sprung. So where did we leave off yesterday? We've been on this kick for over a month now. We titled the show, BioPharm's Precision Medicine Mutant GM Plant Cures for You. I'm sure people are like, what on earth is this crazy chick talking about? But it's true. It is very true. Genetically modified foods have also been used in creating vaccines in food products, not necessarily, quote unquote, used in food. They're not saying that they put them on the market and started feeding them to everyone. As a matter of fact, they got all scared because they had some accidental pollen mix from one of the pharmaceutical crops with the standard crops. But on the other hand, seems like A, there weren't very tight controls, and B, there have been a few incidences in the past where we have had a mixing of pollen between pharmacological food and edible food. And like I said the other day, even though they're concerned about these food products being bred to produce pharmaceuticals getting into the food supply is a noble one, I don't think they care that much, especially in other countries. This is going on full frontal right now, splicing and dicing our food to see what else they could put in it. And of course, it's all for your benefit. It's for the benefit of all the poor people in third world nations who have disease, and we got to fix them. We got to feed the babies banana vaccines. I'm going to read, this is out of Physicians for Responsibility. There was a story that came out of there that was flashback 2002 talking about the traceability and labeling of farm, PHARM, as in big pharma, farm crops, and how it complicates the issues. A few agricultural biotech firms have been fined for violating research protocols designed to prevent pharma crops from contaminating food supplies. Now, like I said the other day, though they say there have only been a few incidences of this happening, we have these labs all over the place. They've been messing around with this stuff at least since the late 80s, early 90s. But I think it's even before that. That was when they first got public with it. How much do you think mad science gone mad? I mean, take a look at what they do with anthrax or smallpox in these high level 4 biosecurity labs, right? We're finding them sitting around on top of filing cabinets without any proper chain of command. Whoops, we thought we killed that anthrax. We shipped it to all the labs all over the world. Oh, what? X-rays didn't kill it. No, X-rays didn't kill it. Okay, we are a society of half-assed humans. I hate to say it, but it seems to be the problem I run into quite often. Anytime I ask somebody to get something done around here, I'm saying in particular, you know that saying about if you want it done right, you do it yourself. Just, it seems like that pride that we used to take as Americans, and it was bred in us through our parents and our grandparents who grew up through hard times, who learned, little Johnny, that if you broke it, you didn't get a second one, okay? If it was broken, you cried your eyeballs out because you are now going to learn a lesson. You didn't take care of it. There wasn't disposable everything. And if it broke, well, you better be ingenious enough to figure out how to fix it with a paperclip and some chewing gum. And so that fostered work ethic. And the work ethic I was brought up with was you do it right the first time. You know, one of my biggest pet peeves on the planet is wasting time or having somebody else waste my time. Because there isn't that much time in my day, and I don't have oodles and oodles of time just to be wasting. So when I do something, there's so many things on my plate, it's got to mean something. Because the only one who's going to suffer in the end is me. And hey, I'm done suffering. I can't suffer anymore for this. So it's business. Jewel doesn't get too much time to play. But if I do it, it better be done right. I don't have time, nor do I want to go back and do it again. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, never once. That's all it's got to be. That was a work ethic. That was being able to put your project in the hands of someone that you could trust, that you know when it's done right. It's very difficult to find anybody that you could do that with right now in this world. It's not very common. Not very common at all, including in the people that you know. There have been many arguments in this household about that very thing. So, when I now apply this to bazillions of dollars added to the equation and large numbers of people with psychopathic personality disorder, and then we look at whether or not all the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed in the research for GMO foods and pharma crops are growing out in the wild, cross-contaminating other farmers' crops with non-pharma crops. You begin to see very quickly that my feelings and thoughts that this probably didn't have a very secure chain of command are quite warranted. All right. There was a story, and actually, I might say this one for seconds because there was another one before this. There was a story that was titled The Prodigene Incident. And that's kind of where we ended the show yesterday. I was looking at this Prodigene. Prodigene was a company that way back when was messing around with putting pharmaceuticals into corn and soybeans. And they were open growing them in fields. One was in Nebraska, one was in Iowa. And they contaminated crops. They let that proverbial genie out of the bottle. And they were fined, of course, but it makes you wonder again how often this is being done and in what other countries is this being done? And how many other, I thought I read something at one point about Oregon as well. And how many of these genetically modified crops that are out there growing are double duty genetically modified crops with some sort of pharma built into them? They don't need to tell us. The labeling is lax. What happens in the lab stays in the lab. As far as knowledge goes, you know, the revolving door between Monsanto and the federal government prevents you from being in the know about what's being put into the mouth of your child. And the majority of the processed foods that are sold in this country are loaded with some sort of genetically modified organism. All right, the Prodigene incident. This is out of the Federation of American Scientists. Few agricultural biotech firms have been fined for violating research protocols designed to prevent pharma crops from contaminating the food supply. USDA rules state that if one grows a pharma crop 1 year, the field then must be left for a year to prevent unharvested GM plants from contaminating the next crop. Now, that was one of my first eyebrow raisings, is that we have USDA rules that say if you plant a pharma crop, meaning a genetically modified crop that's going to be producing some sort of antigen for a vaccine, we've looked at those for days, you got to wait a year then and let the field go empty before you plant again. Well, what if there's, we read about Dr. Huber and the unidentified organism he was discovering in the soil after genetically modified crops were planted. We read about how dousing them in glyphosate killed all of the beneficial soil bacteria as well as the gut bacteria of the animals that consumed it. So I'm disturbed that they're going to allow these pharma crops to be planted, then with just a year in between, be able to plant normal crops again. That's disturbing. To think that there isn't going to be any type of effect whatsoever from some unknown that was planted in the ground, some mad science gone mad. And then you're going to be able to plant Johnny's, apples or carrots, cabbages in that field. After last year, you were planting hepatitis potatoes, In 2002, for example, the biotech company Prodigene was involved in not one but two contamination incidences. The company conducted field trials, literally in the field, in Nebraska, in which it produced Avidin, Avidin, a diagnostic protein in genetically modified corn. After the pharma crop was grown and harvested, some of the unharvested corn kernels fell on the ground, and then the field was replanted with soybeans. And some of the leftover kernels of genetically modified pharma corn germinated to produce plants that they call, quote-unquote, volunteers. What a weird term is that? When these soybeans were then harvested, mechanically, they say. So they must have had a big picker. Bits of pharma corn, totaling a fraction of a bushel, became commingled with the soybeans. And because the USDA has a zero tolerance policy, it ordered the destruction of 500,000 bushels of soybeans intended for use where, in infant formula and in veggie burgers. Now, there's many, many reasons why you should never feed a child soy infant formula, especially genetically modified soy infant formula. If you need to learn about soy, start doing some searches on Google because there's a lot of information out there, but it's got some definite endocrine disruptors in it and some estrogen mimickers. Actually, it's the estrogen mimicker. You do not want to give that to a male child, number one. Number two, the genetically modified soybeans were the ones that Dr. Huber was doing extensive research on, looking at what was happening to the livestock that were consuming it. And that was where they were having lots of spontaneous abortions. And it was passing through the placenta to the unborn offspring. I'd be very concerned about soybeans in general. But anyway, yes, this USDA with good old Tommy Vilsack, who was a rubber stamper in bed with Big Agra. I don't remember what state he had been governor of before he became the USDA head. It might have been like Iowa. It was one of the big states where they have lots of agriculture, and he is like a golden poster boy for Big Agra. So by putting him into the USDA head honcho seat, that was like a golden ticket to allow GMOs full frontal into our food supply. Dr. Huber sent him a letter telling him how dangerous the GMO soy and alfalfa could be. And here's all the research that we did on these farm animals who would consume them and the issues that we had, and they ignored his pleas. All right, back to the story. So those soybeans that were contaminated with that big pharma corn were intended for infant formula and veggie burgers. The department also fined Prodigene another $250,000 for failing to follow the conditions that were listed in their permit and ordered the company to pay over $3 million in compensation for the quarantine. They literally had to quarantine this crop and destruction of the soybean crop. I could just see them coming out in white suits with fire flamethrowers. This is insane. And it's a food. We're talking soybeans, okay? They had to do decontamination and quarantine and destruction procedures just like they would for any other biohazard, but on a crop of soybeans that was supposed to be going into infant formula and veggie burgers. This is absolute, utter insanity. Prodigene did not properly control its volunteer sprouts and harvest in the field. And thus, even if the FDA develops stringent regulations, even if they develop stringent regulations for pharma crops, companies may not necessarily follow them. And what are we going to do about it? How are we going to tell? That's the point. It appears that the potential for a small but consequential mistake in such a large-scale agriculture production is high. For example, here's the other incident of contamination. In another incident in Iowa involving the very same company, a field of pharma corn cross-pollinated a neighboring field. This required the destruction of 150 acres of potentially contaminated plants. And since the Prodigene incident, growing public opposition to the production of drugs and chemicals in food and feed crops has led to a stronger regulation and reduced the number of biotech companies working in the field. Now, what I want to know is, because of public outcry and opposition, they stopped producing pharma drugs and food. Well, I know that I have been pretty aware of at least problems with vaccination since late 80s, early 90s, when my cat ended up with that vaccine-induced sarcoma, as well as them tinkering with the food supply because of all the bizarro issues that I had, starting with that allergy with that tomato that we find out later was when the flavor savor tomato hit the market back in the early to mid 90s, head to toe hives every time I ate a tomato. Then we found out yesterday that, yep, that's exactly what happens, and why they've had so many problems actually getting some of these plant pharmaceuticals on the market is because the proteins that they produce can sometimes cause some major allergic reactions in humans. And tomato happened to be one of the ones on the list that they were tinkering with. I think it was a rabies vaccine, as a matter of fact. I was reading yesterday that they were messing with in tomatoes. So who the hell knows, guys? All I know is that this has been going on for a long time, and I don't ever remember public opposition or public outcry to the production of pharmaceutical drugs in farming crops. Now, maybe there's something that happened in Iowa where everybody is farm savvy versus New York, but we got a lot of farms in New York here, too. You know, take the thruway straight across New York State, and you'll be surprised, not skyscrapers. All woods, rolling hills, green pastures, and farms. Well, it's interesting. Interesting. So, since the Prodigene incident, growing public opposition to the production of drugs and chemicals in food and feed crops has led to stronger regulation and reduced the number of biotech companies working in the field. Permits issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture for field trials of pharma crops dropped sharply after 2000. So, guys, I think it was anything goes back in the 1990s. It dropped sharply after 2000. So we'd already been experimenting on you for a very long time, and you never knew it. There was not, because I was in the tech industry back in the mid to late 90s all the way through until now. And we were very aware of any type of mad science technology. I never, ever, I remember GMOs. I remember us saying we do not want them tinkering with our food. But it was only on a very cursory level that the public was informed about anything. They were not talking about developing drugs in food crops on headline news for absolutely certain. Permits issued dropped sharply after 2000 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and large agricultural biotechnology companies such as Monsanto have decided not to invest in biofarming. Lie. This must be an old article, because I think they all are now, especially now with this buyout by Bayer. Bayer makes vaccines. You know, here's the thing. They could be doing anything in a back room. It doesn't matter whether or not it's legal. Wink. They could tell you it's legal, and when the inspectors show up, you pat his back. You know, you guys do your usual thing. Take him down to the strip joint. Get him all tanked up. Slip him a couple $1,000. And you get your signature. That's all there is to it. You know, those of us who seem to think that regulations protect us, and that means that these big corporations are following the law. You know, come on, get another dose of gullible. I've been bamboozled enough times in my life to know that just because there's a law or a rule does not mean it has to be followed by big corporations. You got enough money, you know enough people, you pat enough butts. You could do anything you want to do. And that's the sad fact of the matter. We are paying these regulatory clowns to quote unquote keep us safe. And it's not just regulatory. How about all these other clowns and all these other federal divisions to keep us safe? They're not keeping us safe. They don't have any work ethic. It's out the window. That's the problem. Nobody gives two shits anymore. And you know what? We're just going through the motions that this is all for real, but it's all a game, guys. Their agenda is still moving forward regardless of what you're being told. And I know it sounds lunatic and paranoid, but trust me, money is in charge. They can make anything happen that they want if they got the cash. Bloop, make it disappear. Bloop, make the results change so it's within proper levels. You know, if you think being a watchdog, investigative reporting, do you know what happens if you start doing investigative reporting on places such as this and sneak around as a citizen journalist, taking snapshots of the poison cornfields that aren't supposed to be there? Somebody catches you on CCTV and they find you in a dumpster somewhere in Maryland, or on surveillance camera walking around all delusional carrying one shoe. I mean, we've seen a few of those already. It's a very frightening place. You know, you just need to be aware. There's no free lunch. Caution, caution, caution on the wind. I don't know what else to say, but the more I dig, the more horrified I get. And I mean, we know human nature. Don't trust them as far as you can throw them. Keep the ones that you trust close, and the rest of them on the outside of that inner circle. You know, there are predators out there, and those predators are just like viruses. They learn every crack and crevice and chink in the armor to be able to utilize for their benefit. Keep yourself and your family safe. Critics argue that only plant species not consumed by humans or livestock should be used in the production of pharmaceuticals. And yesterday we read about some sort of, I don't even remember what it was called, duckweed. I think that's what it was, duckweed. Something that isn't consumed, but they were able to make some sort of drug protein out of it. And they said it was great because nobody eats it anyway, and it's not going to cross-pollinate anything. And you know what? Maybe that's a good plan. I still don't want to be taking the mad science drugs, but you want to grow it in something that is no way, shape, or form of food and can no way, shape, or form contaminate food, well, you know, go knock yourself out. And do it in a lab somewhere, in a dark, stinky back room, not near a farmer's field. And then plant organic potatoes there next year. You know, that's ridiculous. At present, in which you couldn't plant organic, but you could plant regular potatoes. At present, the U.S. government is trying to create incentives for bio-farming companies to use non-food crops, but doing so appears technically difficult and may not be worth the effort. And I wish there was a date on this. I hate when they don't date stuff. This says 2011 is the copyright of the website, but this article could have been written at any time. See, because where I want to go from here is, in the meantime, what has come about after all this, you know, oh, it wasn't economically feasible, and oh, it was too difficult. What has happened in between that and now is CRISPR technology, and we've done a lot on CRISPR. CRISPR changed the game. It's no longer hard. Zip, zip, zip. Knock it out, bink, and zip in a new one. And you can make yourself any genetically modified mutant you want, all happy and easy. All right, let's finish this story, though. If a food crop is used for biofarming, there must be several redundant levels of confinement even for field trials. And again, like I said, if we go to level 4 bio facilities where we had anthrax breaches and smallpox carried in baggies and all these things by these top secret government agencies, and it wasn't just the DOD, it was the CDC as well, that had these major breaches of chain of command of these highly virulent pathogens. What do you think companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer, there's all kinds of other ones, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I mean, we read this list of insanity pharmaceutical startups that were creating pharma with a pH crops. It was like an orgy back in the late 90s, early 2000s. How many of those companies do you think had bio-level hazard 4 going on? Because I doubt it. Strategies for reducing the risk of inadvertent gene flow include ensuring isolation distances between GM crops and non-GM crops, imposing geographical restrictions, such as not growing pharma corn in parts of the country where commodity corn is grown, physical barriers to cross-fertilization, such as fences and greenhouses, and biological confinement, such as rendering male plants sterile. And rendering male plants sterile is another good point to talk about for a moment, because that's one of the things that we've been finding that they've been messing with, not just from a GMO perspective, but also a mad science perspective in gene editing, is how to reproduce living organisms without sperm, without parents, right? We're looking at creating synthetic humans now. How to turn foods into birth control. I don't remember which food that was that we were reading about the other day. I mean, like I said, even soy. Soy is an estrogen mimicker. And when you feed that to male animals, they start to get female traits. So, this whole trans thing we have going on. And there are so many things, all the BPAs and the phthalates that are in our shampoos and soaps and face lotions and all the crap like that over the last 20, 30, 40, 20, 30 years at least, have been causing hormonal disruptions, not only in humans, but also with some of the pesticides in frogs. Syngenta's a big pesticide, and I don't remember what the name of that was. It might have started with an A. I don't remember. You can look it up, though. It's Syngenta's big pesticide, like glyphosate is Monsanto's. It was causing desexing of frogs. Like it's not male or female. It's I don't even know if it was a hermaphrodite. It might have been sterile. It had no sex, or was really confused sex, or it had multiple sex organs. You don't think that that's going to help cut down on this overpopulation wink problem that Bill Gates says that we have? I would have to say so. Quite the plan. It's like the Tower of Babel with our DNA. All right. Here's a little segment out of that PDF I was just reading. It's called Traceability and Labeling. And this is kind of where my big issue is right now globally. I don't care if they're not even doing it in this country anymore. They're still doing research and things in other countries where they don't have stringent laws, quote unquote stringent laws like we have here. Remember when we were talking about CRISPR? One of the ladies, I think it was the chick from CBS, was interviewing Jennifer Doudna, the creator of CRISPR. And she asked her, she's like, hey, couldn't we genetically modify humans with this technology? And Jennifer Doudna says, well, yeah, but, we have laws in this country that prohibit things like that. And the CBS chick says, but don't other countries not have laws like we do? I mean, couldn't they be doing this in other places? Like, seeing what would happen if we spliced genes? And she's like, well, yeah, I guess so. Remember, they've been doing this to plants and insects for a lot longer then they've been now directly modifying the genes of humans. We saw, I mean, they are literally doing gene therapies now. The first one was approved on a child in the UK for some rare disease. We saw also the very first FDA approved pharmaceutical produced in a plant was approved in 2012 by the FDA out of carrot cells for Gaucher's disease. You know, maybe after the show I'll have to check, but I'm almost thinking it was another really rare disease like Gaucher's that the genetic modification to children, living children, like go in and modify their DNA. Whatever that disease was, the kid only lived to be about a year old. And so they were going to give the desperate parents the ability to genetically modify their child and see if they can get the disease out of their genes. I was also wondering if that wasn't part of what this big push is now. You know, after this Orlando shooting, you saw Anderson Cooper is like ramping this all up. This isn't about gun control. It isn't about hatred. It isn't about making you feel like you should be scared because there's ISIS under every bed. Anderson Cooper is making this into a crusade as to bigotry against gays for not being able to donate blood in an emergency. And I'm going to tell you, back in December, I remember, and I found it yesterday, they had actually opened the blood banks back up to gay blood donation. But there was a stipulation to that. You had to have abstained from gay sex for 12 months before you could donate blood to the blood bank. Now, after we found out last year that things such as Alzheimer's and which they were tying to malformed proteins, aka prions, can be transmissible through blood transfusions as well as dental work. And it's been going on for a really long time, and we never knew. And remember, Alzheimer's is a dementia, causes memory loss, very, very, very similar to some of the other brain-wasting diseases out there, such as BSE and Scrapie. What's that other one called the deer have? Chronic wasting disease. I'd be very concerned about allowing HIV-exposed individuals to donate blood to the mass blood supply. And after we did a few stories on even older mice being cross-transfused with younger mice, do you remember that? There were all kinds of studies on that where they tied the blood vessels together of old mice and new mice, and they found when they did that, the old mouse getting the young blood turned young, and the young mouse getting the old blood turned old. We discovered two bacteria in our different bacterial cultures, especially gut bacteria, when they did a personality transplant, swapping the fecal bacteria from one mouse who happened to be outgoing to another mouse who happened to be timid. And they exchanged bacteria. The timid mouse became outgoing, and the outgoing mouse became timid. I don't know about you, but I don't want to get any public blood supply. But it makes me wonder, as they're now doing all this experimentation, including the Chinese, on how to edit, quote-unquote, HIV virus out of genes, because remember, it is a DNA virus. Now, we can get into the whole theory about where HIV came from. I saw some dumbass story yesterday out of one of the medical magazines talking about how we can see human evolution happening right in front of our eyes, right now. We could see within one generation, even less than a generation, they were going through all this stuff. But one of the things they were talking about is, you know, that one case, that one guy who caught that HIV infection from that gorilla in Africa and, you know, it jumped in, got his genes. Oh, my God. And of course, it's all about climate change. I posted that story last night. You know, it makes you Also think about the Ebola fruit bat and that one infected fruit bat tree that started that big pandemic. It makes you wonder if they aren't looking now for some big store, since HIV's kind of fallen off the radar screen, some big store of infection, so they can now start gene editing people. Because it's an emergency, and now you're going to be desperate. So go fix that. I don't know, guys. I'm going to tell you, there's some ugliness going on. Don't trust anything. Don't trust anything. They will go out of their way to get new participants in Mad Science Gone Mad experiments, and they're going to hope. We found out yesterday over 1 million people in the United States are stepping up voluntarily to become a part of this new precision medicine cohort program. To become a part of the machine, to get databased and bag tagged, swabbed, collated, pin cushioned, examined, compared, contrasted. And all you 1 million people are going to help determine a baseline for which they will judge every single other living human as to whether or not they are quote-unquote normal. And that's where the problem lies. All right, here, before I get way too off this, we're already running out of time. I can't even believe it. I have too much to say about all this. All right, here's another little thing. Traceability and labeling. And this is, again, the big pharma taking over our food supply. Farm crops complicate issues. And this is the thing. I don't think that they are tracing much of anything. And this is the big reason why they don't want labeling, proper labeling on our food for country of origin. Remember, that got chucked out a window here last year. World Trade Organization, Mexico and Canada sued the United States under a World Trade Organization agreement for labeling country of origin on meats. It was a law that we actually had passed in the United States, and Canada and Mexico said it caused unfair competition by labeling their meats coming from outside of the United States, and their sales weren't happening. And so they sued us. They sued us. An international organization sued the United States over one of their internal consumer protection laws. And our Congress buckled under the pressure and said, oh, shit, all right. We'll just overturn this law that required country of origin labels because this international organization called the World Trade Organization deemed it discriminatory. And they got rid of our country of labeling. Country of origin labeling. They do the same thing through the TPP. They don't want any type of GMO labeling. Of course, the FDA is coming out and they said, well, we got to fix nutritional labeling because the, what's it called? The portion size is off. So it's very misleading to Americans who can no longer do math to say a serving size is 8 ounces. And they get 900 calories and 22 grams of fat. When in reality, they're not eating 8 ounces. They're eating 16 ounces in a sitting. So it really should reflect the Americans' ability to overeat. So, as they're going through putting these new FDA labels on showing proper, realistic calorie intake and fat intake based upon overconsumption, the dumb American public's going, look, see, they're changing the labels, but that's useless. That isn't telling you what's in your food or where it came from. Are you eating Fukushima rice? Do you have pharma crops in your food? Some of this new stuff that says, fortified now with vitamin A, makes you wonder where that vitamin A came from. Is it something that's been produced inside a plant that was genetically modified? Because we saw that they can do that. They were doing that with a banana. And there was some other one we were reading about 2 days ago, some other fruit or vegetable doing the same thing, producing now vitamins by being spliced and diced to make it do that. My question is, where are the controls? that tell them what they can put in our food, and they can, right? They've experimented on the public many times before. And by experimenting on your own population, hey, plausible deniability. Who's going to know if it was never made public? And it's allowed by law. And you paid your cash and butt patted a few people in the regulatory agencies. You guys went to college. You both have the same little fancy ring. You know, you shared a stripper $100 bill. I don't know. You know, I'm just saying, I've worked in an industry. We did a lot of business with the feds as a reseller for equipment and services. And that's how it worked in that realm. You know, it was old boys school. It didn't have anything to do with laws or fairness. It was about who you were friends with, and you guys went out and bonded like boys. Anyway, farm crops complicate issues, and that's farm with a PH. Using food crops to produce pharmaceuticals adds another wrinkle to the debate over labeling and the traceability of genetically modified crops. In the U.S., environmental and consumer groups and the Grocery Management Association would like to see only non-food crops used for the production of pharmaceuticals. And that's what we were talking about. That duckweed was one that we'd read about yesterday. This will make it easier to trace the pharmaceutical crops, so-called farm crops with a PH, from the field to the factory to ensure that residues do not end up in the food supply. There have also been demands for tighter government regulation of farm crops. Some organizations, such as the Grocery Manufacturers Association, more affectionately known as GMA, say federal regulators are not strong enough to prevent another contamination scare like the Prodigene incident, where corn varieties engineered to produce a pig vaccine were found outside its test plot. So we find out now that it was a pig vaccine of some kind, and I didn't see in here that they told you what kind of vaccine, was cross-contaminating soybeans that was going to be used for infant formula and veggie burgers. How nice is that? Despite the difficulties some see in trying to control such a widely grown crop such as corn, and right, I think I read last time it's over 90% of all corn produced in the United States is genetically modified. There are a number of reasons why it is the genetic engineer's first choice. Molly N. Klein, director of the Government and Industry Affairs at Monsanto's Protein Technologies, explains why corn is particularly well suited to the production of drugs, especially for monocular antibodies. Monocular antibodies are large complex molecules created in the cells of mammals and plants, and they are used to treat a host of life-threatening and chronic diseases, including cancer, arthritis, heart disease. And estimates are that by 2008, more than 50 monocular antibodies will be on the market. And we read yesterday, too, they were working on like 34 or 43 different vaccines out of food in one of those Indian articles. So don't let them fool you. For as much as they tell you that, oh, we put the brakes on, we put the kibosh on working on vaccine antibodies in food crops in the United States, I don't believe them at all. I really don't. Several crops, including corn, tobacco, potatoes, soybeans, and we did a whole host of others over the last few days, have been studied as possible candidates for monocular antibody production. But corn turns out to be the most desirable for a variety of reasons. Corn is the plant that we know the most about. I lost my spot. And its kernel is designed to store and accumulate large, complex proteins. And the pollination of corn can be controlled. So the genes from farm corn are not likely to spread to the surrounding fields unless, of course, you're Prodigene. Another consideration is that fewer acres are needed for large-scale antibody production because corn has a high yield. Tobacco was considered, she said. But once the pharmacological proteins get into the tobacco leaf, they degrade. Well, guess what? Like I said, this article does not have a date on it, but fast forward, tobacco and lettuce seem to be the way that they have turned the entire industry. They made a right turn. I saw a story the other day that said, you know what? We are no longer working on food crops to manufacture pharmaceuticals. We are going to focus on green leaf plants, such as tobacco and lettuce, to be able to produce these pharmacologicals. So here in this story, they're saying they gave up. Oh, it's too difficult. It makes me think that just as they're saying we gave up on producing pharmaceuticals in food crops is a crock of shit as well. Soybeans have also been studied, but it's difficult to separate proteins from soybeans. Potatoes have been investigated, but potatoes and their antibody protein degrades easily. Yeah, well, we also found out that you can't cook potatoes and make French fries or potato chips to feed to the unsuspecting American public without it degrading the drugs inside the potato that you've produced. It is much cheaper to produce monocular antibodies in corn than in traditional mammalian cell culture manufacturing. A typical facility using mammalian cell cultures produces 500 kilograms of antibody per year and costs about $450 million for that 500 kilograms. That same amount of antibody could be produced in 500 acres of corn and cost the facility, I had to sneeze, and cost the facility only $80 million. So we went from $450 million to $80 million. Monsanto is conducting field trials with an antibody-producing corn in a very confined way, says Klein, and all the trials are conducted outside of main corn-producing areas. No crop is grown within a mile of a test plot, and trial plants are detasseled so they cannot pollinate conventional fields. The farmer who grows the farm crop is not allowed to plant food or feed crop in the test plot area or the 50-foot fallow zone surrounding it in the next year. And Monsanto has had to maintain a chain of custody, for the entire trial crop. In addition, dedicated mechanized equipment is used for growing and storing farm corn. The corn is grown, handled, and transported in a closed-loop traceable systems, completely separate from the outside of commodity grain channels, says Monsanto. Wink. Remember, there's such a big revolving door, like I said, between Monsanto and the feds and the regulatory agencies. I don't believe a word they say. And like I said again, too, there's no work ethic. So I don't know, Johnny, who now works at Monsanto, because they brainwashed him at school with the Monsanto coloring books to tell him how wonderful it is. We're going to feed the world of all the poor people with these genetically modified crops. Johnny went out drinking last night. And when Johnny was on the job, he wasn't paying attention. And whoops, some of this got out. I mean, come on. You never have 100%. When you have like a level 4 biofacility, like I was saying, at the DOD or the CDC having major accidents, I'm not going to be trusting any private company who's doing mad science experiments to not have a whoops or not do slippery palming to cover something up. It's very sad, the world we live in. You cannot trust. I always trusted. You just can't. In addition, especially when it comes to large bazillions of dollars of cash. In addition, dedicated mechanized equipment is used for the growing and storing of farm corn. The corn is grown, handled, and transported in a closed loop and a traceable system completely separate from the outside of commodity grain channels, and a significant number of field site inspections of every trial plot to verify the compliance with regulations happens. And U.S. regulators have adequate authority, to regulate farm plants, she concludes. Karl Kolfendorfer, Kuckendorfer, coordinator of biotechnology at the Grocery Manufacturers Association, points out, however, that despite the many advantages of producing drugs and crops, farm crops do present possible risks to public health and financial risks to food producers. If farm crops contaminate the food supply, as nearly happened in that Prodigene incident, it could lead to product recalls, brand name risks, and loss of consumer confidence. God forbid those resistant consumers might have some fodder for their argument. Pharming, with a PH, is open-air drug manufacturing and needs to be regulated as tightly as the brick-and-mortar counterparts, and a science-based, coordinated, comprehensive system for farm crops needs to be set up. Permit controls need to be established and policed by the USDA and the FDA's safety review and input into the process. There needs to also be increased government oversight and enforcement of USDA permit requirements at every step of the growing and manufacturing process for farm drugs. And in addition, there should also be a chain of custody documentation at every stop along the way, as well as waste disposal should be tightly regulated as well. Well, I would say if none of those things are in place, we definitely had some big problems, Clyde. Don't trust anything. See, if nobody was really tracking anything, and they were, of course, just saying they were tracking everything, wink, it was a butt pat and a slippery palm, especially considering the revolving door between Big Agra and the regulatory agencies. Of course, it's just hearsay, but human nature is pretty predictable, especially when it comes to corruption. The USDA and the FDA enforcement needs to be heightened at critical control points in the production and harvesting of farm crops. And until the U.S. government promulgates mandatory science-based regulations that prevent the inadvertent or unintentional contamination of the food supply, it should not permit the use of food crops or crops that are sexually compatible with food crops in the manufacture of pharmaceuticals or industrial compounds, she states. And she's absolutely right. Scary fact of the matter is that a potato is a potato and a tomato is a tomato, an apple is an apple is what they agreed on long ago with GMO foods. It's no different, wink, than standardly grown foods. We saw some new study by Page Shield scientists just recently how after 30 years they went all the way back, way back, and they looked at everything. They looked at people, they looked at crops, they looked at environment, and there is absolutely no issue at all with genetically modified crops. And it's all going to be just to keep you safe. Eat them, be happy, and don't ask questions, Johnny.